Hello, my name is Alex Cruzel. I'd like to welcome you all to another episode of Connecting Climate Capital. Today, we have the privilege of spotlighting ANDE and their work in the green entrepreneurship space. With that, I'd like to tee up the conversation very briefly. One of the main principal questions that we look to answer and spotlight great work that's happening across the globe is really focused, although it's multidimensional, on one question: how do we overcome the global climate financing gap? There's great work that's being done. There's new and novel financing solutions, and there's new and novel technologies, entrepreneurs, infrastructure projects that are all being connected to and being supported by the new influxes of capital. Let's break down the gap. Although we've seen climate finance grow dramatically over the years, especially in the wake of the latest COP, where there's now newer capitalization of intended commitments, we still have a long way to go. And if we are to maintain the global pathway of 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, we're looking at not only billions that will be needed, but also trillions. So we look forward to, again, spotlighting those around the globe who have something to say about these streams of capital, directing them to new and novel ways of mitigating climate challenges. You'll hear different things regarding, today we're spotlighting more in terms of the entrepreneurship, those that are receiving capital, and opportunities to spur economic and sustainable growth. When we look at the breakdown of global climate finance by sources and by instruments, you can see there's a good share that's not only public, but also private. So we're seeing about a 50-50 split, and you're seeing it across the spectrum of different instruments, whether they're debt, equity, grants, and other. One of the things, again, that we're focused on is spotlighting the good work that's being done. Around the world, when we have these conversations, for investors, they say, look, there are no projects. When we talk to recipients, they say, look, there's no money. So what we're trying to do is bring the money and projects, this world together, and sort of shrink the continuum of climate capital, start a conversation, learn about new solutions that can be adopted in other geographies. So we look to build this connective tissue, and we look forward to, again, spotlighting our guests today. Our journey in the space has been accelerated over the past couple of years. Working hand in hand with the U.S. Department of State, the Coalition for Climate Entrepreneurship, to convene leaders in the space and look for different patterns and technologies and innovations from one region applied to the other. We got started with a convening of tech leadership in San Francisco. That carried over to the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, where we hosted an official side event around connecting climate capital. We've been doing more and more and spotlighting certain geographies in Ghana last year, which carried forward to an accelerator program around climate tech. And we look forward to, again, continuing our work as we bring forward these conversations and build working groups for those who do this day to day. So a lot more to come, and we'll keep everyone posted. 1 minute about Telesto. We work, again, to activate and connect climate capital, and we do that in a number of dimensions. One is part of this equation is being investor ready, and that means ESG, and we help companies and investors work on getting started. And that can be in terms of data management, that can be in leading a transformation, and helping them develop a sustainable roadmap in doing so. In terms of green financing and debt instruments, part of the equation, of course, are these new and novel instruments and ways to convene private sector finance. And so those are some of the initiatives that we help advise. Alongside a roadmap to net zero, when we think about ESG and climate and what investors are looking for, it's clear understanding of the carbon risk and the carbon intensivity of an investment. So we help to reduce emissions globally. And we want to make sure that for investors, for business, that sustainability and business can go hand in hand with their strategies. So with that, I would like to pass it over to my colleague, Andrew Allisbury, a managing director at Telesto Strategy, who will then introduce our speaker for today. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Alex. Today we have the privilege to be joined by our guest, Sucharita Kamath, who is the chapter head for India for the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, also known more familiarly as ANDE. Suchi has joined ANDE in September 2017, and she brings with her more than 2 decades of experience, which span the social enterprise, IT, nonprofit, and consulting industries, and include various different senior management roles in consulting, program and project management, social enterprise management, training, and facilitation. We're really lucky to have her with us today, and we're really excited the conversation that's about to unfold. Before I start asking her questions, though, Suchi is going to give a short presentation about the work that Andy's been doing and the work that she's been more directly involved in. So Suchi, welcome to the webinar, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm flattered by that introduction. I noticed, I know you had me there as the chapter head for India. I would like to start before we go into presentation mode to just say that we've just recently expanded to being the South Asia chapter. We've always handled things outside of India from here. But what this expansion means is that we're going to be more intentional and strategic about what it is that we do in countries beyond India and the South Asia region. So just kind of making that slight correction
very
before
exciting.
I jump in.
All right. Up to the minute news. Very exciting.
Right. Absolutely. It was just recently approved, which is why you don't see the change, but that's a reminder for me to go ahead and indeed make that change with my designation. So I'm going to start by giving you an overview of ANDE, right? Because Alex spoke about ANDE as the organization first, so set that broader context, and then dive into more specifics around what it is that the chapter actually does, and I hope that works for you. Trying to get my presentation up. Sorry about that. Give me a second. All right, there we go. Right, so who are ANDE? I will repeat, Andrew shared, it stands for the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. So we are indeed a program/project within the Aspen Institute. What is it we do? We are a global network of entrepreneur or enterprise support organizations, ESOs in short. And we look to propel entrepreneurship in developing economies, right? So all of our network members and partners sort of meet this larger mission of ANDE. Like I said, we are part of the Aspen Institute that's headquartered in Washington, D.C. We consider ourselves a think tank, a glue tank, and a glue of the ecosystem. So Alex talked about how we need connective tissue between the ESOs and investors. That is a role we provide. By the numbers, we are really who our members and partners are. We have 220 members across the globe, operating in 150 plus countries, who in turn support more than 200,000 small and growing businesses every year. Why do we use this specific terminology of SGBs? You will see, and I will come to that, why small and growing businesses. But a little bit about our members and our partners, right? These are organizations like the Telestos of the world who provide critical financial, educational, and business support services to small and growing businesses. Why small and growing businesses? Because data has shown that small and growing businesses are the ones who create and will create jobs. They stimulate long-term economic growth, and they produce various environmental and social benefits. On to SGBs. This definition is very intentional, not just to be different and to add another acronym, throw another acronym into the soup of things. But because, for us, this is a definition that encompasses other definitions that you'll see in the global south, right? There are enterprises that have between 5 and 250 employees, and are seeking growth capital from between 20,000 to 2 million US dollars, right? A key word there is growth capital. So these are enterprises that are looking to grow. They're too small for traditional commercial capital, but are too large for microfinance. Again, why SGBs? As you see here, they're small, but they do have a big impact because they drive growth, they promote equity, and they drive sustainability and innovation. I'm not going to walk you through the details on this slide, but just draw attention to the various ways in which they actually have a big impact, right? And this is a little bit about why we use the SGB definition, because for us, that definition is inclusive of the startup ecosystem, of the SME ecosystem, and the impact ecosystem, right? Again, sort of shining the torch on the fact that all of these are enterprises that are seeking to grow. How do we work? Wherever our chapters might be, this is the framework within which we operate. ANDE as a network will be 15 years in April this year, right? When we started, our reason for being, our raison d'etre, is centered around the central pillars, right? We exist to make the case for small and growing businesses. We're here to cultivate entrepreneurial ecosystems. That's where we play our field building role. And we're here to increase the effectiveness of SGB support organizations by helping them build their own capacities, right? That's why we started, and that's at the heart of what ANDE does. We also identified SGB sector challenges that continue to be relevant 15 years on, around talent development, SGB finance and impact investing, and impact measurement and management, right? However, when we turned 10 and we looked at what we started out to achieve and where we were 10 years on, we figured that we were at a space, having survived, where we needed to set the agenda a little more, right? And increase our scope in that field building role. And that's when we identified what you see as the key themes, which is entrepreneurial approaches to climate and environmental action, gender equality and the role that small and growing businesses specifically play, and the role of SGBs as drivers of decent work and economic growth. Right? We've, as a network, one of the questions we've been asked is, do you have any sector leanings? We've always been sector agnostic. The closest we come to prioritizing a sector is within that climate and environment umbrella. It is still broad because there are many subsectors under that, as you will see and as we will discuss, but just wanted to point that out at this stage. And the reason for that, I think, is pretty obvious. It is just such a crucial need at this point of time that it was just appropriate that we said, hey, this is going to be something that we are going to prioritize above everything else. Who are our members? This is what our membership looks like in terms of the various buckets that they would fall into. The largest pool are capacity development providers. So folks like incubators and accelerators would fall under that bucket. And then we have investors, sector associations, research advisory service providers, foundations, DFIs and donors, corporates and corporate foundations, and academic institutions. And I will pause a second there so you can sort of take in the information a little bit before I move on to the next slide, which will be our last slide for now, so we can get into a conversation and hopefully make things a little more participatory and interesting. So we have 8 chapters. As you can see, they're all in the Global South. 3 chapters in the Americas, 3 in Africa, and 2 in Asia. Like I started off at our introduction, we've just expanded into being the South Asia chapter. That's who I represent. And the specific pieces that we will delve into would be a little more South Asia, well, even India specific at this point of time. But I'm assuming, Andrew, that we will have a few of the broader conversations around why does this mean, because I think central to our value proposition as our network is that we're able to connect the global South through sort of shared learnings and best practices, understand what is working, but also what's not working and how we can learn from each other. Excuse me, but also to sort of increase the bargaining power of the global South in conversations around our key themes or our urgent issues. Again, I'll just pause for a couple of seconds so you can take in sort of our membership across these various chapters, just pointing out what we mean. It is a little self-explanatory. Members working in the region, since we have a single membership, these are members who have a presence in multiple regions, whereas those in red, as we have said, are organizations who may have a presence in more than just that region, but are headquartered in those regions. With that, Andrew, I will hand this back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Suchi, and thanks for the brief overview. I think that will go a long way in helping watchers better understand the broader context in which ANDE is operating. Before we talk more about the work itself, the organization itself, I would love to get a little bit of a read on how you came to be at ANDE in the first place. Just sort of tell us about your journey to where you are today, having been at ANDE since 2017, and now part of this expansion towards a broader perspective on South Asia, not just India.
Right. So I will answer that question purely from a professional journey point of view in the interest of time. But I spent the first 10 years of my professional career in the IT services sector, being big here in India. I spent the next 4 in the traditional nonprofit sector, working with an India headquartered child's rights organization. In the process, discovered social entrepreneurship, spent a little time understanding what that really meant over a period of 2 years, and then came back, started a consulting partnership that looked at working with that impact ecosystem. So I've been working with startups, the impact ecosystem, and SGBs more broadly since 2008. First as a consultant, and as part of that phase in my professional journey, helped start the ANDE India chapter in 2012, before handing it over for the full-time team to kind of run with it, right? And then did various things in consulting with both startups and intermediary organizations. When this opportunity came up, I think it was a good place for me, a good time for me to come back to ANDE full time to kind of lead its growth and expansion, because ANDE had been in existence for a while then, but there were a few challenges. I've considered sort of the chapter my baby in some ways, and I guess one likes to see things neatly packed. It felt like there was an opportunity to do that and do some of the closing of the loop, and that brought me back to ANDE and the work that I do here. I think
Great.
you also had a question around the expansion, right, Andrew? So just to say, I think the timing is right. We've always handled work through our members, but we've been opportunistic about it, right? So when we've had members who operate in, and many of them do, right, because of proximities on various levels, what we're saying now is that time is right, because socio-culturally, politically, economically, the region is talking about what it means to aggregate and look at what we need to do as a region. And it made sense. Our members and partners kind of gave us a big thumbs up, and which is why this was approved by the executive committee. The time is right, and hence it was just natural for us to expand from being just India to being more strategically South Asia.
Makes sense. Well, given that this is a sort of climate sustainability focused webinar series, in your presentation and for those of knowledge of the organization, Andy, already, obviously it's not just SGBs in the climate space that you work with, it's all SGBs across the spectrum, but climate is a big one. Can you tell us more about Andy's approach to climate entrepreneurship and what has inspired it?
I think just pure and simple data that we were receiving from the ground, right? Data, information, feedback, right? Which was, I mean, globally, that if we don't do something right now, I mean, we're already kind of a little late in the game on this. And if we need to exist as a planet, we really need to look at climate and the environment. Honestly, didn't need much more inspiration. I think we've had the gun to our head. We've always worked, right? And we just said, okay, having survived, and since we're in a place to actually be able to inform directions a little more, let's just play a more active role. That's really what happened. And then we actively looked and sought out data, right? That was there, what is information that exists? Can we identify gaps? Where can a network organization like us, where we have the luxury to be able to play that ecosystem building role from a very objective perspective, not worrying about other organizational mandates? How can we identify those gaps, and how do we slowly, well, not so slowly, but try to expand the role that a network can play in those white spaces, which could be gaps, but as much opportunities as well.
Makes sense. So I want to get into more about what Andy's approach on climate entrepreneurship is. Maybe the best way to talk about this is through your recent report on green entrepreneurship in India. I understand, I was there at the annual conference that Andy held in Ghana in September, and this definitely came up, but I want to dig into some more. What are some of the major findings that came out in that report?
Right. So according to that report, which is titled Building the Green Economy, and you can find it on our website, and I'm sure we'll share the link with you. I think there are a few findings that I would like to highlight. It's a big report, and there's a lot to read in there, but I will try and speak about what I think are the key findings, right? Which is one, in terms of the market opportunity, right, which we wanted to present, very specific to India. We identified that green entrepreneurship is a close to $3,500 billion opportunity. And this is specific to SGB active segments, right? So we're talking about the market for small and growing businesses. And within that, when we broke this down, the top 4 segments were green buildings at about $1 trillion US. Waste management and circular economy at $823 billion US. Water management at 769, and then sustainable agriculture and aquaculture at 434 billion. So those are in terms of the numbers that we were able to present. What we also found was that 75% of green businesses and enterprise support programs that were supporting these green businesses started 2015 onwards, right? From the sample of more than 100 enterprises that we interviewed. That was another data point. And I think it's also interesting, if I remember the data that Alex presented at the beginning of this, a lot of your work has been relatively recent as well. And, the graphs will show, I think, will mimic this patterns that we saw here in India as well. So I think that's the other interesting data point. But I think, once we start diving a little bit more into the trends, you'll also see what this means for funding, since that's something that we're specifically talking about here? What is the support that this ecosystem is looking for? What's the policy support that's actually required? And what support do we really need from what we call enterprise support organizations? And I'll pause there to see if you have any follow-up questions.
Right. Well, it sounds like there's a huge opportunity, and it's driven by a very nascent and young ecosystem of entrepreneurs. That sounds like one of the big macro trends. Has the financial flows mimicked sort of this? Are they commensurate with what the size of the opportunity is here? That'd be my first question with respect to if there's a $3.5 trillion opportunity here in green green entrepreneurship, green businesses in India. Are we seeing that the private sector or other investors are rising to the occasion here, or is that something that we're not seeing?
Right. So actually what the report also threw up, Andrew, was that, there is, well, the short answer is there isn't enough money. And that's something you're hearing globally as well. So let me not repeat something you've already heard, right? What we're seeing is interesting is that there is an increase in grant funding at the very early stages, right? When many of these enterprises are trying to innovate, figure out product market fit, etc., right? So that, the very high risk phases, there is a reasonable amount of uptick in grant funding, but it is nowhere near what is necessary, right? I think the other interesting piece that we actually saw is that later on, right, once these enterprises go and they need private sector funding, and this was where the data you had said there was like 50% sort of government DFI funding, but also 50% private sector funding. We haven't actually seen that mimicked here, right? We're seeing that there's a gap there, that most of the funding that's coming in from private markets is really from DFIs or from government entities of one kind or the other, right? So purely private funding, there is definitely a significant gap that actually was thrown up. And I think it might be nice to also see kind of how some of that is connected into policy elements, right? So
That'd be
even
great.
there in in private sector funding, so let me just pull that. And this, by the way, is from the report as well. So you can go in, and we've obviously gone into details there, but I will walk us through it at a very sort of high level at this point. So as you will see here, the focus so far has been very energy efficiency, renewable energy, cleaner fuels, right, in India. And therefore, you see that at this point, actually, the market opportunity is still there. It's always there in a large economy like India, but relatively, they're either small or medium. And you can see the related, incubators. What I like to draw attention to is the dark green boxes there, right? I've already spoken about the market opportunity, so I won't go into that particular piece here. But if you look at green buildings, right, which was the largest sector, for example, what we've identified is very, very low funding support. And I'm going to focus on the funding pillar, right, because that's what this conversation is about. And also try and link that up to policy support. What's interesting is that energy efficiency, renewable energy, and cleaner fuels actually have low policy support at this time. That's not to say that they haven't had, right? There've been policies that were put in place to actually enable those sectors to grow far more than some of the others. However, at this point, we do have the government really looking at waste management and the circular economy and green buildings, right? And this also points to where things are going 1 to 3 years down the line. which is really where we expect the growth to come from in the green business space, especially with SGBs, is around those two elements as well, right? Because there will be, and that is something that we have tried to incorporate into the way in which ANDE identifies where opportunities may be and where we should play a more active role. I'm going to leave this up because I'm pretty sure you would have a few more questions
I do. Yeah,
leading
no,
on from here, Andrew.
this is a fantastic exhibit. There are definitely a few follow-up questions that come from this one. I think one of the interesting ones that emerges just looking at the data is that it looks like in general, there is a bit of a trend in terms of I view sort of like there's a theory of how this works out, that if there's a market opportunity and there's policy support, and then there's, let's call it accelerator incubation support, which is giving entrepreneurs in that space the opportunity to build the skills that enable them to take advantage of business opportunities, the theory would be that sort of funding support follows. So my first question is, have you found that that's true? Because the data suggests that maybe it's not true, or there's just a very long time lag. And then my follow-up question to that would be, what is it that about the three dark green boxes at the bottom, water management, waste management, and green buildings, where the market opportunities are very large, and some of the other ingredients are already in place or are soon to be, where you have sort of medium, for example, policy support in water management, medium accelerator support. What is it about them that is making it so that the funding support is not yet there, or do you think it's just a question of time?
So definitely time is a factor. There's no doubt about that, right? But and your first question was, given that we have accelerator support, shouldn't funding follow, right? So I think, and this is where time comes in, and there's that yes question, right? Like I said, there's been a lot of grant support, that high risk money that has come in. There are some identified larger project-based financing in the renewable energy space that the DFIs are funding. What is happening now is that incubators and accelerators are trying to figure out what are those business models that will actually be able to attract that private capital that sits in the middle, right? Because there are certain needs, that capital expects certain returns. Incubators are informing how those needs might need to be changed, right? The other piece that we actually identified is that investors would like to, but this space is perceived as so technical that they haven't really understood what investing in this sector would really mean if they needed to make those adjustments, right? These are the kinds of things that we actually identified, and we've actually tried to build into demystifying, right? So how can we present, and it's a two-way process, right? Of the investors informing and working with policy and incubation around what will work for them and what's an absolute no-go, right? Because there is a kind of capital that is supposed to be there to address these different stages and to address various needs. So the other nuance, for example, that we found was that, and Alex referred to it, and I was thinking it at that point as well. So when you talk about tech and climate tech support, there is software-based tech, right? And especially in India, lots of things are, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, are tech-based, platform-based, on the cloud-based, right? But what about other brick and mortar technologies, for instance, like in green buildings, right? There's certain things that tech can do, but when it comes to construction material, and it is a very hard to abate sector, right, as well, and that's been globally acknowledged. How does support need to be tailored to support enterprises? But then how do investor expectations also need to be adjusted to meet the very specific needs of these subsectors within that larger green business umbrella? So these are the pieces that are being figured out, and that's why it's something that takes time.
I had so many follow-up questions stem from that response, but in the interest of time, I won't pursue all of them. I guess What I will ask though is, with a very comprehensive table like this, what does ANDE do with information like this to decide where it focuses sector-wise, or how it makes different decisions about the initiatives it prioritizes in India after looking at something like this?
So I can walk you through that, but I just want to check, Andrew, because I, don't want to have the slide up there for longer than it needs to be up there. Would you like me to leave it up there or answer that question
I
by
think it's still
stopping
helpful, if you want to sort
share?
of talk about, as you're explaining, when you
Okay,
have a
sure.
information synthesized like this that gives you sort of a heat map of where the biggest gaps are, how does ANDE take that information and digest it and then decide what it does to support SGBs across all of these
Absolutely.
sectors?
Right, got it. So I've already alluded to certain challenges, right? Which is, how do we help investors understand the unique needs of green businesses, right? Let's take that problem statement. Yeah, that's something we're looking to work on. So we're 4 months into a 3-year project that we're doing around waste management and the circular economy. Why did we put that together? Because that is the sector with the second largest business opportunity. Why not green buildings? Because that's a far harder play for the reasons that I did mention, right? Does that mean we're not doing work there? No, we indeed are, and I can, give you a few examples of what we're trying to do with our members. But I will talk about sort of that waste management and circular economy piece. One is, we spoke about time, right? Many of these changes do need time, and I think it's a luxury that we're very grateful for, that we're able to actually think of this as in a 3-year time frame, right? And there are different pieces to that. So we're working with investors. We're looking to build a cohort where we work with them over these 3 years to, one, clarify, make clear what are the unique needs of waste management and circular small and growing businesses. And we have different sub pieces, right? We're looking to put together an investment guide that we can actually use to share with the ecosystem at large, and to be informed by and to work with this. We've had an investment manager training that works with portfolio managers, both of funds, venture capital funds, but also enterprise support organizations, right? So those who are doing due diligence, making investment decisions, but also those who are preparing enterprises to receive these funds. And we will be adapting that curriculum. It's been on for 13 years. It's a 5-day boot camp, adapting it to the very specific needs of waste and circularity. We're working with entrepreneur support organizations. So that's the other piece, right? You had investors, you have accelerators and incubators, to look at creating what we're calling an innovation fund, where we will provide grants to them to design programs that specifically address some of these nuanced needs of. And that's where, for instance, a priority sector for us would be green buildings. We'd look to see how we can have more. So, for example, there is one ANDE member incubator for green buildings in India, right? Shelter Tech from Habitat for Humanity. Very few other incubators even have this as a subsector within their capacity building programs. And it's just an example, right? So how can we have more shelter techs? That's what their program is called, right? Those are the kinds of questions we want to address through the Innovation Fund. But we're also trying to see, is there a way in which we can bring investors and ESOs together to pitch for that pool of funds, right? So that at the end of 3 years, the enterprises supported by these accelerators and incubators are more likely to have gotten funded, because there is this consistent engagement that's happening. Again, not rocket science, but it hasn't actually been implemented on the ground here. We're working with other partners like the Global Impact Investing Network to look at, how do you measure impact, right? How can you build climate specific metrics around waste and circularity that then impact investors can work with to assess investment decisions? There are other pieces, but I don't want this to be a monologue, so I will just pause there, Andrew, and see how you'd like to direct
No, that's all
the rest
great.
of the conversation.
That's all great. No, this has been super helpful. I wanted to pivot still on the same topic here, but thinking forward, meaning a little bit of extrapolation here. And I was wondering if you could, based on what you know about the current state, what the efforts that various different actors are making to fill some of these gaps, what you think this table would look like in, say, 3 to 5 years as an exercise of sort of trying to understand what you think green entrepreneurship in India will look like in that same time frame.
Here's what I would hope it would look like, right? Since you did say 3 to 5 years, I definitely like to see, funding support where it is low on those really high opportunity sectors identified, right? So green buildings, waste management and circular economy, water management, sustainable agriculture and aquaculture, where it is low, right? So definitely waste management and green buildings go up. Just given what I'm seeing from the policy side of things, I do think we should actually have moved into a high on that, just based on what's happening on the ground here. I think with green buildings, we're a little further behind. So I'm not sure that we would actually, be somewhere between a low to high, but you get the idea, right? That's what we'll be watching for, right? And I think as ANDE, what we'll be trying to figure out is, what very small role have we been able to play in this we'll be this little cog in this big wheel in trying to sort of move progress along on those fronts, right? So and that's why, I mean, this table is one of my personal favorites, because I think it's a nice way to actually say, okay, where have we gone if we use the same criteria? Have those lows moved up to a high low, even, ideally at least to a medium, because then that would have been significant. That's the kind of way that we're looking at it. Andrew, I hope that answers your question.
It absolutely
Do push
does.
me if I haven't been specific
No, no,
enough.
no. It's very helpful. And I know that we're going to be up at time soon, and I want to make a little bit of space for just two additional questions. One, which is stepping back more broadly, is, what are some of the things that India has learned through all of this green entrepreneurship efforts, and what you've learned through all this green entrepreneurship efforts that can be applied to other geographies that ANDE is working in?
Oh my God, so many things. You know what I would do, Andrew, is just say, I mean, I would encourage listeners to just look at the two reports. We did this report for Kenya and for India, and you will see, so many similarities. And we haven't started unpacking what this means for women-led green businesses, for example, right? And if you just take the data that Alex presented at the beginning of this, I think all of those problem statements continue to remain at the broad to medium levels, pretty much consistent in the global south. Don't get me wrong, there are nuanced differences, right? So one of the stark differences we found between Kenya and here on the investment side, which is why I'm bringing it up, is that there is a lot more local private investment at play in India, whereas it's a lot more foreign private investment at play in Kenya, right? So you will see these kinds of nuanced differences, but you know, are green businesses in general just not receiving enough funding? Yes. I mean, you had a figure for India, uh, like that was the top reason that everybody listed. In Kenya, it was the top reason that everybody listed. In India, we had 60% actually come back and say that, for us, it's not just funding by itself, but the role that collaboration can play in filling this funding gap, right? What they were actually saying is that many of us continue to work in silos and we need to be able to talk to each other to specifically address that funding gap, right? And that is again something that I think is a learning that you could take across the board. And these are just a few examples, but you don't have to look really very far. If you look at the constraints around women-led climate enterprises, is it a challenge? Is it a big challenge? It's a yes to all of these, and the data points to that, right? So these are the kind of learnings that are there across sort of all of our markets, not just in Kenya and India, where we did a deep dive, and we're obviously looking at other markets where we could do this kind of deep dive. But there are also, very specific insights around that. Just since we mentioned gender, uh, what kind of green businesses do women-led businesses run vis-a-vis their male counterparts? If we take green buildings, for instance, it looks very, very different than it would in waste and circular economy, right? So there are those broader, at the next level kind of trends that are also common across the regions in which we're present. But yeah, I think you get a sense um, of what I'm trying to say.
I do. All right. Well, with the little time that remains, Suchi, what do we have to look forward to in terms of what you and ANDE are working on over the next couple of years? What should we expect to see from you emerging?
Yeah, and this is going to be an ANDE question. I'll start with sort of South Asia. As you can see, a lot of our work has been very India focused, and rightly so. In many ways, we are the largest economy, and I believe there are learnings. So we'd like to take our learnings and findings and just see how we can expand that to other countries, respectfully recognizing while some learnings are applicable, the solutions may not just be easily transferable, right? There are elements that we can learn from there, but they need to be localized. And I think that that is the way in which Andy would look at taking this across the other regions and the 8 chapters in which we have an on-ground presence, right? I think as Andy, we are definitely excited about what we can do there. I mean, excited is one way to put it. I would just say that, I think what we recognize that the nature of the problem is really so big. And that's really where we can have a role to play in helping, co-create solutions from a very systemic lens, right? And that's why we're excited about it. I mean, we are concerned about missing the bandwagon. But I would like to say that for us, it's more than that, right? So we will continue to look, and many of these, if you look at our urgent issues or our thematic areas, they're cross-cutting issues, right? There's finance at the intersection of climate and environment. There's gender at the intersection of climate and environment. There's decent work and economic growth at the intersection of climate and environment. Outside of that, in other sectors, right? There's the intersection of climate and environment with health. We will continue without belaboring those intersectionalities, looking at all of these, recognizing that we need to be uh, smart about where we can use our collective bargaining power to move the needle the most.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Suchi. We really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure having you on the webinar.
Likewise, Andrew, thank you for having me here and giving me this opportunity. And I hope that together we indeed can do more.
Same.